right. Hello and welcome to our Florida podcast. I'm Kaylee Johnson, and with me today is my sister Maegan. Each week on Mondays, I bring you a story about Florida history or a unique place, and on Fridays, Maegan features a furry, feathered, or scaly resident of the state, sharing our unique ecology in Florida. Maegan, how are you doing today? I don't know why I'm in news presenter voice, but we'll fix it.
It's okay. It's good. It's fine.
How are you doing?
I am good and ready for this episode. You changed it up a little bit last minute. Wasn't what I was expecting, so I'm very excited now.
I did. I told Maegan I was doing one thing, and then at the very last minute, I just completely derailed it. But I'm very excited. I love the topic. I feel like we kind of missed the mark on Black History Month because we were 1 week late because I was insanely ill at the beginning of February. So all of our postings got pushed back. So we covered Black History a bit with the Fort Mose episode number 5. So if you haven't listened to that, be sure to go back. And I mean, really, it's not a problem because in reality, we plan on sharing everybody's stories all year round. But I am still excited to kick off Women's History Month with a fabulous woman, and her name is Marjorie Harris Carr. All right, so Marjorie Harris Carr was born in 1915 in Boston, Massachusetts. But we're not going to hold it against her because in 1918, at 3 years old, her family moved to Bonita Springs in Lake County. So that's just south of Fort Myers in the southwest part of the state. I'm trying to add more descriptors of where things are because I realized while doing this research that I hear things like Bonita Springs and, all these different places. And I know it's in the state, but I actually don't know where it is. So that's in the southwest corner, just south of Fort Myers. Her parents were both naturalists, and they taught her about the native flora and fauna on hikes and while riding on horseback to school, which just sounds so idyllic.
I'm jealous.
Right? So she moved to Fort Myers, moved a little bit north into Fort Myers during her high school years, and she graduated in 1932, at which point she enrolled in the Florida State University for Women, which we now know today as FSU. But FSU was a women's only college for 42 years from 1905 to 1947. Did you know that?
Wow. No, I had no idea.
I remember hearing about it when I was doing a project up at UF in high school, and I was like, it's just kind of wild to think about. But yeah, she was there in 1932, or started there in 1932. While she was in college during the summer, she designed and taught a field course in natural history for young people throughout Lee County. This project was part of the National Youth Administration. So, immediately, not even 3 minutes in, we're going on a side quest. And we're going to talk about the National Youth Administration, which was a New Deal program. So, in our Mayaca episode, we talked about how the CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps, was started by FDR as part of the New Deal program in an effort to get citizens working and earning money so people could get off the streets. Because in 1929, stock market crashes, we're launched into a Great Depression, everybody's out of work, people are going hungry, there's a massive famine underway because of the Dust Bowl happening out west. So the whole country is just, honestly, everywhere around the world was really struggling at this point. So FDR's plan was to get a bunch of people back to work, create a social safety net, so to speak, to get people working and get money into their hands so that they can feed their families. So one of those organizations was the NYA, the National Youth Administration. It was established on June 26, 1935. Its goal was to provide education, jobs, recreation, and counseling for male and female youth ages 16 to 25. So they had a bunch of different programs going, but basically this is the teen to young adult. You are either in school, hoping to go to college, but a lot of those plans are of course getting derailed as everything is getting derailed at that point. Or you graduated and instead of being able to get a job, all of a sudden there are no jobs. So these programs were really for them. So they had a student aid program, which looks a lot different than our student aid today. Students in high school, college, and master's level could earn money for working part-time, usually as clerks or maintenance workers. Out-of-school work programs help bridge the gap for students that had graduated but were unable to find employment. And for the most part, they worked on highways, roadside parks, playgrounds, schools, recreation parks, and public buildings. So they're doing public service work, getting paid for it. They're not getting paid a ton, but honestly, anything at this point is super helpful. And it's just giving them something like, I either have this education or I'm working on getting this education, extending it, so that when things do pick up, like they're able to jump into that job market. Like otherwise, the idea is like you're looking around and you got like all these young people that are just like on the streets, barely making ends meet. They also taught classes in trades and office and clerical work. So for like guys, you're going to learn electrical, you're going to learn agriculture skills, you're going to learn how to fix cars, build planes, that sort of thing. If you're a woman, you're taking typing classes, you're learning how to become a secretary, stuff like that. If you're not already like in school for something. In that email there that I sent you, there's some pictures of like the flyers that went out, and I'll attach them in the video. But there's some cool flyers about like getting back to work. There's a picture of the women all set up in their typing class, which is really cool. So in 1936, 4 years later, she had earned her Bachelor's of Science in Zoology. At this point, she got a job as a wildlife technician with a fish hatchery in Wallacca, which is along the St. Johns River. And you'll also see in there is a picture with a map of Wallacca. I'll also attach. But for anyone that's just listening and not watching, since we are a podcast, Wallacca is north of the Ocala National Forest. It's actually like its own Wallacca State Forest, but it attaches into the St. Johns River. And the St. Johns River eventually like runs up to Jacksonville, St. Augustine area. Here, she was the first female wildlife technician employed by the U.S. government. So not just like first female wildlife technician in the state, first one employed by the U.S. government at all.
Look at her go.
Our girl's making waves. And another important first, this was her first time being on the Ocklawaha River. And if you're like, what did you say? It's Ocklawaha. If I'm pronouncing it correctly, I'm doing my best. Ocklawaha. And if you're like, cool, that definitely sounds like it's in Florida, but where is that hat? That's where I was. It is in the Ocala National Forest area, and it's one of the tributaries for the St. Johns River. So it comes from like Ocala National Forest area and then leads into the St. Johns. It's 74 miles or 119 kilometers. It receives a lot of its water from the lakes in the area, most notable Lake Apopka, and the Silver River, which comes from the Silver Springs in Ocala. So this is the river that connects the Silver Springs, which is, we're definitely going to cover in a future episode, but a cool place Meg and I have both been to, and it pumps out gallons and gallons and gallons of fresh water. It gets on the Silver River, joins another river, and all of that leads into the Ocklawaha River, which goes to St. John's, which goes to the Atlantic Ocean. Ocklawaha is a Creek word for muddy, which you might have seen. There's a kayaker that posts, or paddleboarder. I think he does it all. He posts some videos on social media. He does tours on the Silver River, and he'll post the picture, like videos of the confluence where the Silver River, which is spring fed and like crystal clear, and you can see 20 feet down, is just gorgeous, where it meets, and it might be the Ocklawaha or it might be a different one, I'm not sure, but it meets this other river that is just full of like brown, and gets really brown. It's very much like what you expect when you see like regular Florida fresh water, and it's just crazy the way that those two rivers come together, and that all feeds into this tributary. It was her first time working here, and she falls in love with the area. Foreshadowing. Major foreshadowing. 1937, 1 year later, 1 year after graduating college too, Marjorie met and married Archie Carr. Archie was an acclaimed naturalist and author. They were married for 50 years, and during that time they had 5 kids. So, she's a naturalist, he's a naturalist, and an author. Match made in heaven. I mean, honestly, I didn't dive into their relationship, so I don't know what went on behind closed doors, but they seem very happy. They're married for 50 years. They were in similar lines of work. They had 5 kids, and for their marriage, they made their home in Micanopy, Micanopy. That's another one that I had heard, but wasn't really sure where it is, and it's this small town that is south of Gainesville. And even as they were married and as they're having kids and building their family, they both continued to work in conservation. In 1942, so we're looking at 5 years later, Marjorie earned a Master's of Science in Zoology from the University of Florida in Gainesville. So she got her Master's in Zoology, and this is early 40s. So she's married, she's having kids, and she's getting her Master's. She's crushing it. Doing it all. Now, in the early 1960s, So we're jumping forward about 18 years. So she's in her mid 40s, like at minimum, she's 45. I'm assuming at this point, and the reason like the story kind of picks up is the kids are probably either grown and out of the house or just like much more independent. So it's like, all right, I'm in my mid 40s. I'm getting to action. I'm doing what I want to do. And she starts getting very involved in local organizations such as the Alachua Audubon Society and the Garden Club in Gainesville. And she starts really ramping up her environmental preservation efforts, including initiating the Paynes Prairie Wildlife Refuge. So we've all heard of like Paynes Prairie State Park, and if you've driven north on I-75 just before Gainesville, you get to Paynes Prairie, and it's just this beautiful area. Like look out, and there's just like all these grasslands and some water and stuff. Beautiful, huge open space. So at the time, Paynes Prairie was only as wide as the right-of-way along the highway. So like we look out and we see acres upon acres. It was just like the right of way. It was like this green space. And so, but they took care of it. They planted cabbage palms along the entrance and created viewing areas so that people would stop, people would take interest in it. It was being cared for, and all of that. This eventually led to it becoming the Paynes Prairie State Preserve that we know today, which I actually haven't been to Paynes Prairie yet, but I know there is great hiking and camping there. It's one of only a few dark sky sites in Florida, which is also really impressive to me since it is very close to Gainesville. And Gainesville is like, big college town. Today, the Paynes Prairie Preserve is 22,000 acres of grass and wetlands and is the only place in the state with wild roaming horses and bison.
I saw that, and I'm very excited.
Yeah, we definitely have to go. And
Paynes Prairie has been on my want to go list for a very long time now.
Oh my gosh, for sure. I knew that they had bison and horses, but I kind of forgot about it, and then I read it and I was like, oh yeah, that's right. We have to go there.
Yeah.
So yeah, we'll definitely be coming back here for an episode. And then you'll get to do a creature feature on some bison and or wild horses.
Or both. Or all the above, yeah.
I also just love the idea that like the garden club did this. That's not really what I expected garden club to be doing. I expect them to like, I don't know, having like tea cakes in the garden talking about when to plant your carrots. But they're like, no, we're taking action.
Not that we're shaming.
No.
Not that we're shaming having garden club and plant your carrots.
Yeah, no, we're completely down. Invite us. But
we are. We're just also excited that they're doing this as well.
Yeah, exactly. Like extending it to the natural spaces and planting these native plants and like making it something that people kind of have to pay attention to and want to pay attention to. And I think it's just the like really cool example of the power of community, which there's just going to be so much of in this episode. So moving on, she also led efforts to restore Lake Alice on the campus of the University of Florida. They founded the Junior Naturalists of Alachua Audubon. And when I say Alachua, if you're listening and you're not in the state of Florida, Alachua is the county that Gainesville is in. So that's what that word means. But they founded the Junior Naturalist Association with them. It was very active in the local schools. And basically, the Audubon Society, I have now learned, goes beyond just bird watching. No offense to our bird watchers. Much love. Actually, Maegan and I were just talking the other day about how, like, ooh, it's sneaking up on us. We're going to become bird watchers. I can feel it. Like, I'm already like, wait, what was that call? And I don't know what I'm talking about yet, but it's going to happen. So, once again, no hate to the bird watchers, but I assume that the Audubon Society was just old people talking about birds. And we're going to find out in this story especially, that they go way beyond just doing that. So they're all about protecting birds and other wildlife and their habitats. So as you can see, kind of see where this is going. But that was like a program that they set up in schools to like share that information, share that passion with the local kids as well, get them started young. She also initiated a nature photography competition dealing with Florida landscapes. This competition selected photographs based on their success in picturing the intangible aspects of Florida's environment. And I looked up the word intangible, trying to be like, what are we getting at? And intangible is like the unspoken, like the unobvious, like photographs that kind of encompass all of what Florida is, which I thought was like really interesting, and it kind of made me think like, how does one go about doing that? But it was one of the first such programs in the US and kind of created a trend, because like then when you have that, you have all these pictures and you really get awareness, and also you just get people outside trying to take these pictures and paying attention to like the little things. Now, another huge win for the Alachua Audubon Society was when they invited 2 representatives of state and federal agencies to give a talk on the Cross Florida Barge Canal. So, what is the Cross Florida Barge Canal? Have you heard of this at all?
No, I have no idea what this is actually.
All right, this will blow your mind. It was a canal proposed to connect the Gulf of Mexico through the state of Florida and into the Atlantic Ocean.
Oh, okay.
Got questions?
Lots. I don't know where to begin, though.
Yeah, so the plan was to... There's a map in there, too, so pull up that picture. The plan was to start north of Tampa, just west of Ocala.
And it to Jacksonville.
Yeah, just west of Ocala. Dig a bunch of, dig out canals, dig out the land to make room for the waters, and then connect it to those river systems, to the St. Johns River, and then it's going to come out at Jacksonville.
That's huge.
It's a huge undertaking. Like, I think it's kind of crazy. We see the memes where, like, everyone in the U.S. gets annoyed at Florida for, Florida man type stuff. And they're like, we should just cut Florida off and send it into the ocean. But, like, no. They were talking about that. Like, we're talking about separating the land by water. Now, obviously, this idea seems straight up crazy. But this was actually something that's been proposed as long as there have been European settlers in the state. As soon as the Spanish got here and they went from one side to the other, they're like, oh, we need to find or make a way that we can get through. That way we don't have to go all the way down and around the peninsula. So, like, this has been in the mindset since the 1500s. Again, in the 1800s, it was highly discussed as it would save lots of money and time for ships. But the idea was always scrapped because it was too extensive and too expensive. Because, like you said, that's a huge project. The time that they were talking about saving ships here, though, like, by the time we get to the 1800s, the 1900s, and, like, technology has changed, they want to create this, that way it can go straight through the state. But the time they're talking about saving from going around is 3 days. 3 days.
You're joking.
Oh.
You're joking.
No, I read that, and I was like, really? We're trying to save 3 days, which, I mean, I get it more, like, when it was longer and when water travel, like, wasn't so safe.
A week, 2 weeks.
Right.
3 weeks. Anything more, I would be like, okay, you know what, maybe. But 3 days?
3 days. So.
Wow.
Then we get back, we're going back in time to the Great Depression of the early 90s. So the county is struggling, and just like we talked about, FDR is looking to employ citizens in public work projects, just like the National Youth Association that Marjorie is part of, just like the CCC that developed so many parks. He's looking for different projects that are going on in the U.S. and, like, how can we get these going, get these finished, get people to work. And so the Cross Florida Barge Canal comes across his desk, and he's like, yep, seems like the perfect idea. It'll employ thousands of men, and when it's built, it will increase the speed of commerce, which is, like, we're all focused on getting the economy moving at this point. So FDR assigns $5 million to the project, which is a lot of, like, $5 million in 1930s money. 1930s depression money.
I was going to say, that's depression. That's a lot of money.
Yeah. But keep in mind, the expected budget at the time to finish the project was over $143 billion.
Did they go over and say what they expected to, like, save and, like...
I'm sure that they did, but I didn't find any, like, calculations of, like, oh, it's going to save this much. Because it seems, like, when you start thinking about it and you're like, well, if technology's so good and it's, like, 3 days, that seems pretty darn negligible. Like, when you're looking at $143 million.
Yeah.
FDR says, nope, let's get started. I'm going to give you $5 million. And that $5 million out of 143 is only 3% of the budget.
That $5 million went from so much to basically meaning almost nothing.
Yeah, exactly. But they got that $5 million to start, and they start on the project anyways. So initially, the thought was to dig the canal 30 feet deep so that large oil ships and stuff could use it. The idea was that, like, they would be able to drill in the Gulf, drill the oil, and then transport it through the state of Florida to New York, where the refineries are, and everything would go a little bit faster. But when they were talking about doing 30 feet deep, people quickly realized that that was not the best idea because it would potentially intrude on the aquifer, which is our fresh and clean drinking water. you would potentially have saltwater intrusion into that aquifer, which would feed like Gainesville, Tampa, all of those areas. So really quite a bad idea. But instead of abandoning it altogether, they decided instead of 30 feet, we're going to only go 12 feet deep. So it's going to be a little more limited, but we're still going to be able to get most ships across the state, and that's going to be great. So work began north of Ocala, and overnight Ocala became a boom town with 8,000 men working there at its peak. So
Wow.
Overnight Ocala has 8,000 men just dumped in there. I saw one quote, I didn't write it down, but like that the county ended up approving like 20 new liquor license or some astronomical amount of like, because businesses were like, all right, we're going to get in on this. We're going to hit this boom as well. Now, there's also some really messed up things that happen at this point too. One of which there's a story of a labor organizer named George Timmerman, so a union guy. Like he was coming in, he wanted to make sure that the men were working in safe conditions, that they're getting paid properly, and going to get them to unionize. That way they'd have more power over the boss, like not so much over the bosses, but more power to negotiate with the bosses to make sure that they had all that fair. But he was, quote, captured, roughed up, and found in the woods, crucified, tied to a tree with his lips sewn shut, as a warning that labor activism will not be tolerated on the canal, says Stephen Knoll, co-author of Ditch of Dreams.
Wow.
Yeah. Now, I highly doubt that was done by, like, the guys that are working, because they're working, but, you know, the bosses and their henchmen and stuff like that. So, I don't think anyone ever unionized there, and George Timmerman actually, like, kind of disappears from public record. So, I don't actually know, like, his fate outside of that, but crazy, scary, very mob stuff.
Very mob, very straight to the point.
Yeah. Now, also, there was an African American community called Santos that was located 6 miles south of Ocala, and it was essentially wiped out by the canal. So there's this thriving community. Like it was said as like juke joints on Saturday and church on Sunday, all of that, like a thriving community, but as African American. Like, keep in mind, this is like segregation era, and the government said, no, we need that land because that's where the canal's going to go. So they bought up all these tracts, or they used eminent domain to seize it, and they paid way below market value. And basically, like, overnight, town was demolished because everyone had to scatter and try to build new lives after they'd already built a life and were getting underpaid for what they had. So really terrible. Something that we see even with like the building of the highway systems. It's kind of like unfortunately, it's a thing that happens, especially in this time period, but I'm sure it still is happening today in lots of different situations. But that town completely decimated. People had to scatter, find new places to live. Houses and businesses were demolished, even though those businesses had been thriving. Like, it was a living community. But remember how FDR only allocated 3%, lots of threes, 3% of the budget to this project? So the funds dried up and work on the thing stopped, and the community of Santos was never actually reached. So they bought up all this land, they made all the people leave, they ruined people's lives and businesses and everything. And then the canal was never actually even built there. So it was all for nothing.
Wow. What did they end up doing with the land then?
So the land was still the government's property at this point. So it's just, but there's nothing being done with it. It's just demolished, and it's just like, okay, it's not canal, but people can't live here, and it's no longer yours. It's the government's now. So work on the project was halted for years. And like I said, in part due to the constrained budget, also partially because World War II starts. So that takes all those working men and puts them in uniform as part of the military force. So now we're back up to where we left our girl Marjorie. I don't mean that disrespectfully. I mean that very nicely. But that brings us back to 1962, where Marjorie and the Audubon Society invite two federal agents to talk about the probable effects of the canal. So sources say that these two federal agents presented a very nice, very well-rehearsed presentation about what the canal was and where it would go and what effects it would have and everything else. But after they finished presenting, there was a blizzard of questions, the quote blizzard of questions about the effects the construction would have on the geology, the hydrology, and ecology. And all of those were met with unsatisfactory answers. Basically, you know, they had the whole presentation like, this is what we're doing. This is what it's going to look like. It's going to be great. This has never been done before. This is a huge project. And then any questions, and everyone's like, yeah, what about the animals? What about our drinking water? What about the land? Like, what's happening? What is going to happen? And people didn't have answers because like environmental impact just wasn't a thing that was being studied or discussed at this point. Marjorie would say later to a newspaper, the audience that had come to the meeting with a completely neutral attitude toward the canal project went away that evening disturbed, uneasy, and determined to find out more about the probable effects of the barge canal on the Florida environment.
That's a win.
Yeah, and that's I think this is so clever because it's like, all right, you guys want to do this. Let's put on an event. You come, you talk, so they get the chance to present their stuff. But then you have to answer the public's questions. And if you can't answer the public's questions, the public is not going to trust you. And the public does have the power if we're willing to take it. So I think it's very, very clever. Invite them in and ask the questions. So federal funding allowed the construction to resume in 1964. So President Lyndon B. Johnson presided over the groundbreaking. And again, the argument was made that this was good because the canal was going to create jobs and the canal would be a good defense for our oil tankers. So at this point, you got the Cold War starting. So it's like, well, if it's in this canal that we control both sides of, then nothing can get our boats. They don't have to like go out and around. So that's the argument that's being made that this is a good idea. Marjorie and a group of activists argued that the Ocklawaha River must be protected and shared images of destruction caused by the crusher. Well, that's another picture that I have sent to you, but like I said, we'll share it on here. And if you are a listener, it's basically this huge metal machine, looks like a tank, and all around it, the ground is just leveled out. Trees are fallen over. It just looks like kind of like a war-torn area. Like if I didn't know what I was looking at, the way it looks like a tank, I'd kind of be like, what happened here?
It looks like a hurricane tornado would just have came through, but like not in just like a distinct area. Like it's just like the whole thing is just wiped out.
Just leveled. So they shared images, they shared the destruction. The machine could take down full-size trees, and it was also famed to clear an acre an hour. Just unheard of. So that really did not sit well with people. That was really scary. It's also crazy to like look out and you know, you go from areas with like big cypress trees and all that, and it's just leveled. It's gone. Now, in 1969, once again led by Marjorie, members of the Audubon Society and others created the Florida Defenders of the Environment, the FDE. So she's already got Garden Club and Audubon Society on it, but now she's going, we're going to make something that is specifically set up for this. So it's the Florida Defenders of the Environment. This group was made of hydrologists, geologists, economists, zoologists, and other concerned citizens. And I think this is so interesting too. So we're pulling together like who's who of everybody. We've got, you know, the people that are studying the water, people that are studying the earth. You have economists, so people are going to look at that economic impact that's going to have. So they're not ignoring that, like, well, jobs are important and everything else, but what is it going to do to the economy after this is done? Because eventually this project will be done and those jobs that were created are no longer there. So like what's going to be left of the natural space of the things that we can make money on after it's gone? You got zoologists, so the people studying animals, and then other concerned citizens. And they wrote a carefully researched scientific report called The Environmental Impact of the Cross Florida Barge Canal with special emphasis on the Ocklawaha River system. So, very direct title. This environmental impact report was one of the first of its kind, and that, along with the work that Art Marshall was doing in the Everglades, led to the creation of the National Environmental Protection Act. So this act now required all federal projects to assess environmental impacts before work even starts. So you can't break ground until you've at least done your due diligence to go, what is this going to affect? Now, years later, like, there's a lot of ways that can be bought out and, like, that research can be kind of tainted and stuff. But overall, like, this didn't even exist before. You could just say, I want to do this project. I want to build a canal across the state, and we're going to do it without looking at, like, okay, but that's spring-fed water. Like, how much of our fresh drinking water is coming from this area that we're about to taint with salt water and stuff, you know? So many things. So that's a huge move. President Nixon eventually halted construction in 1971 due to all these environmental concerns, And at this time, $75 million had been spent on the project, and it was only 28% complete. Yeah, so thinking about those original estimates, like how much more money went into it and how much more still to go into it. It's crazy. 1976, Marjorie and others from the FDE, Florida Defenders of the Environment, spoke before the governor and cabinet. After 2 days of testimony, Governor Askew and the cabinet voted to ask Congress to deauthorize the barge canal and restore the Ocklawaha. So what they're doing is sharing testimony, because at this point, like, it's been, let me picture so in 1971, Nixon halts it for a little bit, but there's still companies and everyone trying to, like, push this through to make this happen. There is still some work being done. But at this point, the Florida Defenders of the Environment are going before the governor, and they're asking, like, no, we want to go up the next level. We want this to not happen, to not be a thing anymore. And it goes through Congress, but they have to continue to work to deauthorize the canal. Was continued by the FDE, so the Florida Defenders is still working on this up until 1991.
So she spent a lot of time.
They spent a lot of time in her organization that she started, and we're highlighting Marjorie in this, but obviously there are plenty of other amazing men and women that are doing this. This is not a one-woman show. She happens to be one of the leaders who's really pushing it, but, like, all things happen because of a group of people coming together, working together. The work to deauthorize the canal was continued by FDE until 1991, when the barge canal was finally deauthorized. Today, the FDE continues to work to restore the Ocklawaha River and its forest. After the canal is deauthorized in 1991, the Florida Greenways project is authorized, and this is authorized by the Friends of Florida and the Conservation Fund. And basically, this project, they have this vision for a system of integrated trails and greenway systems. So at this point, it's just an idea. The idea is that we would have hiking trails and biking trails and all these greenways that connect us to other cities and locations that we could travel by and recreate by. In 1993, the Florida legislature transfers the former lands for the canal to DNR and the Office of Greenways Management. So at this point, the government had said, okay, we're not going to build the canal, but they still had that land for another 2 years. And then in 1993, they give it over to the Office of Greenways Management, which had been formed between now and then. Now, unfortunately, in 1997, Marjorie Harris Carr did pass away, but she was 82 years old when she passed. So, at least she got to see, like, the canal is not going to get built, so she got to see that all the way through. And also, she was 82. She raised 5 babies. Like, I'd say that's a good life. Now, the lands that had been given to the Office of Greenways Management would become the Marjorie Harris Carr Cross Florida Greenway. So instead of the Cross Florida Canal, we have the Cross Florida Greenway. And so that kind of cements her legacy in Florida history. The Greenway is a 110-mile-long linear park available for use by hikers, bikers, paddlers, horseback riders, and hunters. So, you see what I'm saying? It's 110 miles long park that is made out of all the land that was claimed and taken for the canal. And then it's named after Marjorie Harris Carr.
That is so cool.
Yeah. Now, the unfinished section, that 28% of the canal, is now stagnant pools and serves as a reminder of what could have been in, like, a negative way. Like, scary what could have been. Not like, oh, we missed out here. No. Now, the town of Santos, the African-American community, is still disbanded, but it is memorialized by the Florida State Park Service at the historic Santos Recreation Area. Here, there are picnic pavilions, basketball courts, and a baseball field, which is particularly meaningful because there had been a former historic Negro League baseball field there. And the last Saturday of February, they hold a celebration of historic Santos. So, while unfortunately Santos never got, like the people that were pushed out of their homes, they never got to see those homes returned, but at least that area is acknowledged, and, like, kind of the crimes that happened there is acknowledged. The Greenway Management Office that was established in the 90s went on to be involved in the development of multiple greenways across the state, including the Rails to Trails movement. So, like, in the Sarasota area, that's the Legacy Trail. But anywhere in the state where they've taken old railways and then turned it into a bike path or hiking, walking path, that was all part of the Florida Greenway management, and that would not have happened without that first project being established in 1991. They've also expanded on that in including different hiking trails, biking trails, kayaking trails, and in 2000, the first true land bridge in the United States, they built the Cross Florida Greenway land bridge over I-75, which is where we'll be hiking this weekend for the I Did a Hike Florida Trail event.
I was going to ask you because I was wondering if this was going to come up to that. I thought I'd seen that.
Yep, so it's not the canal, but it is but yeah, also I think it's kind of crazy that was the first true land bridge like over an interstate in the US, not in Florida, in the US. So yeah, I'm excited to see it. I've driven under it plenty of times. Excited to actually be on it.
Same. Me too.
All right, well, that pretty much brings me to the end of the story of the canal that almost cut across the state of Florida. But I have a couple points I kind of want to like touch base on a little bit more. So one, I think it's interesting how long it took to be shut down. Like this started in the 30s. In the 60s, we knew it was an issue. There were people bringing up how much of an issue it was. And it still took another 30 years until 1991 for it to be stopped, and until 1993 for anything to happen with those lands. So I think it's just such a good reminder that sometimes things that are worth fighting for will take time. I also love the community involvement that made it happen. And it kind of makes me want to look into like my local Audubon Society and see like what they're up to, because I really, really thought it was just like bird watching. But I think it'd be so neat to get involved with some of these groups. I know the Florida Springs Council is one that I follow on Instagram and highly recommend. They do a lot of work to like protect our springs and make sure that we have fresh and clean drinking water, and make sure that developers and businesses aren't over consuming that water, and actually making the state care and like at least write it into legislation that things can't be done. So they're making moves. But I just think it's so important to recognize how much more we can accomplish when we're working as a group.
I agree. I'm also kind of curious. I really enjoyed listening to this episode. I would be curious to know specifically, maybe it's something we can touch base on later on. It's like specifically what were the environmental effects that were going to happen? What, native wildlife, plant wildlife, kind of all of it. If this canal would have been put in place, because like you said, that's been going on for almost 30 years. So
I should have got
that's a lot of different wildlife and plant life.
I should have dug more into the environmental impact report that they wrote. But I mean, I can imagine, so if you're connecting the Atlantic and the Gulf, instead of just having those marshy areas that are going to be saltwater, brackish, salt and freshwater, now you're going to cut the swath through the state. You're also going to be separating environments that were all part of the same, like, shallow riverbed before. Now they're going to be cut off by this canal.
Yeah, I can imagine that would be something that it would be a huge, I wouldn't say detrimental, that might be too dramatic, but something that would cause a lot of issues, because not to mention that, originally they were thinking 30 feet down, and they want to go 30 feet down. That is a lot of different species, wildlife, plants, insects, so many different species.
Even in the 30s, they went, oh, that's a bad idea because we might mess up our drinking water, which there's still a chance going 12 feet and going all the way to the center of the state where there's not supposed to be salt water, that you were going to mess up the drinking water.
Yeah, and it's like, that's taking away a lot, and then also just not even to mention the combining.
Well, and it's like, we're talking about, like, moving oil rigs through there. Like, what if, like, we know that stuff happens with oil, like, we had that in the Gulf of Mexico when we were kids. Like, stuff happens, and if that happened, and, like, Silver Springs, I think, is one of the highest outputting springs, and that all ties into the Ocklawaha River, goes up the St. John's. Like, that is people's drinking water. I think it's so interesting because we get so disconnected from where our water comes from. We talk about where our food comes from, but we still have to have fresh water. Fresh water is not a given, and if we go messing around with some things, and in Florida, like, a big part of that is the springs and the aquifer, we won't have fresh water.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's something we all kind of forget.
Yeah, I mean, I do. Like, you don't think about it. You just turn on the tap and it's there. And especially because Florida's not super drought prone. Like when I was in Arizona last year, they've got, even in like nicer hotels we were at, they've got signs about like, please limit your shower to 5 minutes. It really matters. because their water is so limited, because the only water they're getting up there on that mountain is snowmelt. So if you use all the water, like, there just won't be any. And I think in Florida, we're kind of spoiled because we are in a wet area. We get rain. You can look anywhere and there's fresh water. Like, we kind of take it for granted, but that's not guaranteed. And there's a lot of things we can do to mess that up. There's also a lot of things that we can do to make things better. I'd also imagine it would, like, mess with migration patterns and mess with the manatees and stuff. Because they use that. I
can imagine a long list of things that it would affect. It would be a lot.
Yeah. I really find it interesting that they went ahead and brought in an economist too. Because I think that that's such an important argument that we kind of get lost in, is like, oh, but it's creating jobs. Or if we stop doing something, it's going to take away these jobs. And that's really important because, like, yeah, if you don't have a job, you don't have a livelihood, you can't feed your family. So, like, I'm not discrediting never discrediting the working class people that are trying to, like, just make ends meet. But if we create these jobs for a limited amount of time and we destroy the environment, and with that destroys all of the jobs there and, like, living potential in the area for years and years to come, like, what's the economic impact further down the road? And, like, how do we bridge that gap? Because it's not the developers that are going to be hurting. It's going to be the construction workers and the oil riggers and the coal miners. Like, it's always the little man that's going to get the shaft on that.
Yeah.
Soapbox off. And finally, I just think it's really interesting to talk about the lasting impact that this whole project has, and especially, like, the work that Marjorie and the FDE has, because they did all of this to fight the canal. And out of fighting the canal, then you had this coalition for, like, here's what to do with the land. Let's make Florida greenways. And now you have bike systems that connect different counties and towns. Like, I could hop on my bike and ride to the Legacy Trail and I can be down in Venice. Like, that's really cool. That's connecting communities. And also, just, it's kind of like what we're talking about in the Florida Trail episode, where, like, the original design for the Appalachian Trail wasn't that people were going to thru hike it and do all of them and see every inch of it. The original idea was that anybody could work and then go out for the weekend, go out for an afternoon and be somewhere in nature and, you know, touch grass, as the Instagram influencers like to remind us. But it is important. It's important to be outside. It's important to have access to beautiful, healthy places. And you don't get any of that without, like, this fighting and all of that. And I just think it's really, really neat.
I agree. I think so too.
Yeah, do you have anything you want to add?
I don't think so. I think this is a great episode, though. Thank you so much for sharing with us.
Yeah, I want to close with a quote from Marjorie, because I feel like what she says just encapsulates how I feel about stuff so much. It's part of, like, why I was so inspired to want to create this podcast in the first place. But she is answering the question, how was she able to stick to her work for so long? As she said, I am an optimist. I also believe that Floridians care about their environment. If they are educated about its perils, if they are never lied to, they will become stewards of the wild places that are left.
I agree. I saw that too. Because I started looking up a couple things while you're talking about that, and I saw that too, and I was like, I agree. And I like that. And it is very much so why we started this podcast and have that same mindset.
That's the thing. I think all of us want, like, beautiful outside spaces. We just might not know how to help or what that looks like. And so through education, we can get there. Education and action. Anyways, I promised I was done ranting. So thank you guys for listening. Please like, subscribe, follow. Find us at Our Florida Podcast. If you have suggestions for future stories or anything you'd like to share, any cool stories, like if you've been on the Crossway, like, let us know. If we haven't been, we'd love to see your pictures. You can email us at ourfloridapodcast@gmail.com. If you learned something today, please share with a friend. And we are now on Apple Podcasts, so you can leave us a review. And we would love to see that. I can't tell you, like, how excited Maegan and I are right now. At the time of recording, we have a whole 26 followers on Instagram, and we have celebrated every single follow. We're like, oh my gosh, dude, we're at 22.
Definitely. We have screenshots. We have screenshots to prove it, and we probably will prove it eventually and be like, yeah, we were this excited.
Yeah, so, and still are. So give us a like, give us a follow. Maegan, you want to give us a teaser for your episode on Friday?
Yeah, so we will actually be talking about a waterfowl.
I thought you didn't want to talk birds.
So I don't, but yeah, I'm talking about we might be turning into bird people and bird watchers. Well, yeah.
You guys
but
can watch the evolution here.
And I'm excited.
Awesome. All right. Well, bye, guys. Have a great day.